super exciting, relevant as I'm back up north in 100+ degree weather, heat acclimatization. We're going to go into some of the, like what it is, what it isn't. There's a lot of times a misconception between acclimatization and acclamation. Some of the benefits, caveats, women specific, there are definitely differences, and then some time for Q&A at the end. All right, heat acclimatization versus acclimation. So on the left, acclimatization is actually living in or going and living in the heat. It's basically getting used to the climate, so training outside in the heat in order to get used to it. Acclimation is creating that hot environment, so faking it with either a sauna or a bathtub. So I think it's important to understand the two differences and the effectiveness of both. Scott's going to be talking next week about acclimation. And so this way you'll have an idea of what both of them are. I realize it's not always possible to live or go live for an extended period of time in the hot environment, but in terms of long-term physiological adaptations, acclimatization does have better results. All right, the textbook definition: biological adaptations that reduce strain, improve comfort and exercise capacity, and reducing your risk of serious heat illness. The short version is make it easier to train and perform in the heat, make yourself more comfortable, so that's a big mental component, perform better, but also reducing the risk of getting something like heat stroke, obviously fading out towards the end. I don't know if any of you have done ridiculously hot races, but you know the weather can dramatically change your performance. So if you know that you're going to be training somewhere or racing somewhere hot, if you can go live in that environment, you will benefit biologically, physiologically, and also mentally. We're going to go into some of the biological adaptations further down. The idea with heat acclimatization is repeated exercise heat exposure. So it's not just living in a hot environment, it's actually doing your training in that hot environment. It takes both climatic heat stress and physical exercise intensity. So, you know, if you live, let's say, Arizona, 121-degree days, but you do all of your training inside in the air conditioning, not the same thing. You actually have to do your training out in that heat. The research has shown that you can start to see adaptations in as little as 2 weeks. As we'll talk about later, men a little sooner, women can take a little longer, with 90 minutes of daily heat exposure. And the caveat here is that heat exposure, you want to make sure that you're training at intensities that you're actually going to be racing at. So obviously not every session has to be high intensity race pace, but at least getting in a majority of those sessions. So if you know you're going to be going, if you live in a hot climate, that's great. Obviously, some of your training sessions are going to be at race pace, but if you're going somewhere for, say, 2 or 3 weeks, if you have that opportunity, you need to put at least 40% of those sessions at race pace or race intensity to really benefit from those benefits. The graded increase in intensity and duration, the idea there is that, let everybody in here. You don't want to start all at once. Obviously, if you live in a hot climate, you're used to it, but for not only safety, but also easing your body into those stress, you want to slowly increase. So if the goal is 90 minutes a day at that hot, extreme temperature and or humidity, then starting off with 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or breaking it up into 2 sessions of 45 minutes in the morning, 45 minutes at night, also easing into that intensity. If you have the opportunity to go somewhere for a couple weeks and train in that heat. Let's not go out on day one and kill yourself at race pace and end up with like heat stroke and dehydration and things like that. You will still receive the benefits if you gradually increase that intensity and duration. And then when you are exposing yourself to that heat, you want to make sure that you get up to at least 90 minutes. Obviously, if you have longer training sessions, brick sessions, you're going to be getting longer, but you want to make sure that you at least hit that 90 minutes. So then kind of nuts and bolts of how heat acclimatization works. So the goal here, obviously in the middle, is physiological and subjective markers. So we are trying to change not only your physiology, but subjectively how you feel about that heat. Beginning process, sweat earlier, sweat more, and lower concentration of sodium in your sweat. The idea is to get used to that hot temperature and allow your body the ability to start sweating sooner to cool you down, to be better and more efficient at sweating, but then also teach you to lose or train your body to lose less sodium so you can stay hydrated longer. Lowering heart rate when training and racing. Again, we want that same work to not only feel easier, but also actually be easier, put a lower physiological strain on your heart. Training in acclimatization, lowering core and skin temperatures. Obviously, if your core temperature is better, blood flow is better, muscular productivity is better, skin temperature, that has a lot to do not only with cooling, but also with the mental component of how you're working. When our skin, they've done studies that show when our skin feels hot, regardless of the temperature, mentally, we associate that with a greater need to cool. So if we can lower your skin temperature, you will feel less of a need to cool your body, making it easier to work and train and perform in that heat longer. And then here's where the mental component comes in, lowering thermal discomfort and perceived exertion. If you feel that it's not as hard, and if mentally you're able to handle the higher temperatures, the higher sweat rate, the intense heat, you will perform better. So all of these combined, the goal of acclimatization is to improve performance. We've all said it, if you are comfortable being uncomfortable, that's half the battle right there. And so acclimatization really helps get you into that, that mental state of mind so that you're able to, so that the heat isn't as overwhelming as it is before, which I think, even if you're not living in a hot environment, when you go and you're training on the trainer, do you have the air conditioning on? Do you have the fan pointed at you? Do you ever do any of your runs in the hot parts of the day? Be careful if you do, but mentally being uncomfortable, I think we've all been there, but those benefits will help improve performance.
Elizabeth, I had a question on,
Okay.
Is there like a systematic way to measure if you are try to say the word correctly, like, are you
Acclimatized?
Yeah.
Yes, so doing your sweat rate testing is a great way to tell if there are changes in how much you're sweating. And again, you want to make sure it's at the same temperatures, at the same work intensity, but also sodium loss. If we don't all have the ability to test sodium loss, so sodium concentration in our sweat. At the beginning of those sessions, if you're seeing a lot of that caked on salt, the white crust, if you're over thirsty, if you have that headache, that dizziness standing up, and as it starts to get less, so again, somewhat subjective, but there are visible signs to be able to see if you're getting better. And then obviously with lowered heart rate, keeping track and looking at the same temperature, same sessions. If you feel if rate of perceived exertion is the same, looking at your heart rate, is it going down? The last, the sessions when you started, was it 145 and now it's 137? So easier way to track there. Not really core and skin temperatures. But then the subjective marker, I think, is something that is potentially overlooked. If you feel like it's getting easier, and I think that's something to note, like mentally, is it easier to, sorry. I don't know why that went off. There we go. Is it easier to do that work? Are you feeling that that work lowered? But sweat rate testing using the app is probably the best for that.
Awesome. And I recently saw a few people talking about like the core body temperature monitor. Has anyone had any experience with that? Any folks, any athletes on the call? Just out of curiosity. That was something for us to research more.
Yeah, something fun to go test. All right, some of the caveats. So acclimatization is excellent, but there are things that you have to, if you really want it to work, you have to make sure that you're doing it correctly. So the first is kind of watching out for air conditioning. If you, the research has shown that if you are going out and doing your heat training and being in that hot environment and then immediately come in and do sit in the air conditioning or take an ice cold shower or go right back into work where it's nice and cool, that can decrease the level of acclimatization and therefore take longer to actually do that work. So I'm not telling you to stand outside and just sweat for an additional 2 hours, but not immediately jumping into a cold shower or cold water, allowing your body to cool down naturally. Maybe if you're coming back and making a meal, eating that meal outside in the heat, in the shade, obviously. So point being, don't immediately go make yourself comfortable if you would like to still, again, to an extent, but making sure that you are allowing those adaptations to take place. The next one, it has to be hot. Mildly warm doesn't work. So if you are going to be racing in 100-degree heat, 90-degree heat, low humidity isn't the same thing as 100-degree heat, high humidity. And I know we can't always get the exact same conditions, but sometimes athletes will go, oh, well, I live in a pretty hot temperature. It's not so bad. I'll train at the hottest part of the day. It's not the same thing. You need to make sure that you are mimicking that environment that you're racing in, especially where humidity is concerned. If humidity is going to be a factor, then you need to be acclimatizing in a location that has a high amount of humidity. And lastly, the 5 to 7 week window once you leave. This is why they found that acclimatization can potentially be better than acclimation, is because the effects last longer. So men and women, again, slightly differently, but if you have spent significant time, so 2 to 4 weeks in that hotter environment acclimatizing, you have a 5 to 7 week window once you leave where your body will still see the benefits of that acclimatization. And obviously, as the time goes down, so from the 5 week mark to the, let's say the 4 week mark to the 7 week mark, it's slowly decreasing, but you still will have some of those benefits. All right, some other factors affecting acclimatization: body fat percentage and metabolic rate. So leaner athletes are better at cooling themselves. Those with a higher metabolic rate, their bodies tend to run hot. So you would need extra time to make sure that you're acclimatized. Your body is hotter. It's going to need more time for those adaptations. Age: as we age, how our body responds to temperature changes. We don't respond as well. That's the, so potentially allowing yourself, most of the research is done on athletes ages 20 to 45. So if we're not in that window, then allowing yourself more time to acclimatize is needed. Also medications. So some medications can interfere with our body's ability to tolerate temperature extremes. The reason? They affect those parts of the brain that control temperature regulation. So asthma medication, hay fever, some heart medications. It's something to look, and if you take any, read into it, look at the drug facts, but the most common ones, asthma, hay fever, and heart medications. All right, women and the heat. We women as a group, we respond a little differently. So it takes our bodies longer to adapt. We are going to need additional days or sessions in order to see those same acclimatization adaptations. If the marker is 10 to 14 days, women are 14 to 20 to see the same that men would see in that 1 to 2 week period. The variations that we're going to see in those improvements. So an increase in performance, if you're looking for an increase in performance, that's going to take longer. If you're looking to lower your core temperature, that's going to take longer. If you're looking to lower your heart rate in the heat, that's going to take longer. What's not going to take longer, because we'll talk about in a second, is our ability to improve sweat rate. So that actually takes slightly less than men. So it's something to remember, you will get better at sweating in the heat faster. So if you're looking at your hydration strategy and you say, okay, I'm going to acclimatize for 3 weeks, know that while the heart rate changes and body cooling and performance effects are going to take that whole 3 weeks, you will start getting better and sweating more earlier on. So you'll have to be mindful and potentially change your hydration strategy. So something to look out for after that 1 week mark, your body is already going to be better at sweating. The reason for that, women have more sweat glands, plain and simple. We have a smaller body mass. We have a higher fat percentage in our body. And usually overall, we have a smaller body surface area. So all of these things combined is why some of these tweaks take longer or less time. The other really interesting component that they found with women is when they looked at if they only acclimatized to heat, what the results were in their performance, or if they worked on improving performance, like if they didn't acclimatize and spent that time just training and really working on their performance, which group benefited more when it came to race day. And the group that focused on aerobic capacity and improving overall fitness actually had better results. So the point being here, focus on improving your overall fitness first. And then if you have time, if you have that ability, then work on heat acclimatization. Women will see a better performance if you focus on improving aerobic capacity. All right, a lot of information. I want to open it up to questions and talk about any of the kind of details, any experiences you guys have had with trying to acclimatize, maybe tricks, anything you guys want to know, what the research says. Okay. Has anyone tried or successfully and or failed in hot races? I certainly have. Had some bad hot races.
I'm curious from maybe some of the coaches on the call, like Colin, Nikki, Jordan. Originally, we had titled this targeted towards Kona, but we decided not to make it so specific so that it can apply for more athletes. Would love how you coach your athletes in terms of, you coach them to go early to, let's say, a hot race location, and if so, how many weeks? Be curious for your perspectives there.
I guess I can speak. I actually haven't had a lot of athletes do hot races in the last few years. I have totally failed in hot races. When this study came out, it's been, and I'm going to blank on the name of the study, that correlated some similar physiological effects from altitude training to heat training. You're probably familiar with that study, and I'm going to blank. I can't remember, but I was like, oh, this is fantastic because I live at 8,500 feet, right? So maybe I'll be better at the heat, but the reality is that I live, in Colorado, where I don't have a lot of heat, and I tend to actually avoid the heat, which is not great, but I know what I do better with and what I don't do well with. I'm just better at cold races, and I've kind of come to accept it. Maybe that's a little bit of a giving up, but like you, Elizabeth, I've suffered in the heat. So for my athletes that recently I've gone through some heat acclimation, I start pretty early. Most of them can't travel to the race location, to kind of like Kona. So what I do, and I'd be interested to hear what your take is on this. I've actually recommended some dry sauna, sitting in a dry sauna after, well, usually it's at a gym. So it's going to be after a swim, take your hydration into a dry sauna and work up. We start at like maybe 5 minutes. It depends on the athlete and how comfortable they are in the heat, up to sort of like 15 to 20. So we'll see if that helps a bit. So the other ways I've had them do some heat training within their home is usually no rides that have any intensity. I try to stick to just aerobic to let the heat be the driver there, instead of try to double up on the stressor, right? So kind of Z2 ride, Z3 into some tempo maybe, and sort of like, yeah, up to 90 minutes, not too much more than that. So what I'll do is say, don't ride with a fan, right? Maybe, I have not, the one gal I'm thinking about recently, she's kind of in the South already. So I just say, try to turn off the air conditioning for that room, and it already gets pretty warm. So yeah, that's kind of how I've gone about doing it. Maybe, again, with the runs, like having them do them, working up to the, a longer time, but sort of starting with even 20 to 30 minutes, in the kind of the heat of the day. But it's just, it's so stressful, right? If they're really going to be running in 90 to 100 degrees, I feel like too much of it is going to impact the rest of their week's training, which, again, like you said, Elizabeth, it's more about like, where can you get the most kind of, it's not bang for your buck, it's not what you said, but if you can make the aerobic, or maybe even some, the aerobic adaptations, you're going to be better off overall than focusing on heat training. So that's just my 2 cents. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear the other coaches, what they've been doing as well.
I second that, just as from personal experience and the research shows, and Scott's going to go into sauna heat protocol next week for very specifically, but it's a very effective way. If you don't live somewhere, it's a very effective way to do it. And the building up, like, as you said, the return on investment for training in the heat and the toll that it takes on your body versus actually, getting acclimatized. If you're going to be suffering for the next 2 to 3 days because of dehydration and fatigue, then it's not worth it because you've missed 3 days. And how can you do that? Could you take, one of the studies even said that, an extended walk in the heat can help to acclimatize. So if someone, can take their lunch walk per se, at that time of the heat when they're not training, even that can show small improvements. But if they do it over a 2-month period, then they can see some of those benefits.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So many athletes, I've been trying to incorporate more walks for stress relief.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's a great idea. If you can get out for your lunch walk, that would probably be helpful if you're going to have a hot race. And what can you do to, again, like get some adaptations, but not totally tank yourself from a,
Yeah, exactly. Jordan, I know you've done a lot, Kona time and prep getting into that heat. Do you have any suggestions for acclimatizing?
Yeah, the early, which I've done. in the past. I have an athlete this year prepping for Kona, and with her, she lives up in Montana, doesn't have the flexibility to get out that early. So we will do a sauna protocol. She has a hot tub in her home, so that's really handy. So sounds like Scott's going to cover this next week. I won't go into the details, but kind of build up to 30 minutes of exposure in that hot tub. So kind of it's like sauna / hot water protocol, hot bath protocol. So we'll build up slowly. So after her workouts, we'll start by doing 5-10 minutes of exposure, not hydrating until and slowly rehydrating after she's done that time in the hot tub too. So like getting used to that somewhat feeling of discomfort, but again, building her up, starting with 5 to 10 minutes and then getting her up to hopefully 25 to 30 minutes, and do that 10 days to 2 weeks prior to her departure to Kona. So she gets comfortable, and then she's got the time when she does get to Hawaii. I think she'll get there a week before race day. It's a little, I keep forgetting it's a Thursday race for her this year. But yeah, giving her some time then to like get acclimated once she's on the ground in Hawaii.
Cool. Yeah.
But I've never raced super successfully in the heat. It takes me about 2 weeks to get acclimated, and it still feels incredibly uncomfortable. I'm a very, very heavy and a very salty sweater. So
yeah, same. But I think, have you ever had to go in not having that time? Like, do you know if you didn't, even though it doesn't feel great, do you know that it absolutely benefits you to get that 2 weeks ahead?
Oh yeah, yes, I did 70.3 Vietnam, coming from, it was a May time race, so leaving San Francisco in May and going straight into Vietnam where it's like hotter than Kona, insane humidity, and like yeah, it felt so hard to run a 2-hour half marathon. It was like crazy. I'm usually faster than that, but and there it's like you didn't have the time to acclimate, so it was more a question of like doing what you can on the race to keep yourself cool. Lots of ice. They were handing out full water bottles, and just dousing myself with like a 1.5 liter bottle of water at the aid station, just straight over the head, carrying on, and going aid station to aid station. Like you're typically trying to move a little faster in a half Ironman, but yeah, not also like pacing yourself, like realizing that there's you have to take off a little 10 to 15 watts on the power when it gets that hot, and then also managing your pacing strategy too.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, gosh. Vietnam, would you do that race again? Just while we're talking about it, I'm curious, aside from the humidity.
I checked it off the bucket list. It was great. Awesome one-off experience. I don't need to suffer for 2 hours on that run course again.
Gotcha.
Colin,
I'll jump in for a second here.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, if you guys can hear me. Sorry, I am actually in my truck here, so I keep dropping in and out here. But anyways, this is great, Elizabeth. Thank you. I guess one question. I mean, I'm with the ladies here. It's coming from a colder climate, and most of my clients are in a colder climate. It's the sauna protocol for us, so I'm definitely interested in Scott's presentation next week or when that happens. But I'm curious. Is it something, I'm guessing the answer is no, but like, let's say you're going to do a race in altitude where if you're not able to get there, I believe it's 2 weeks before, you're pretty much better off getting there like just before the race and kind of just shocking your body and having it, if you go a few days before, you can actually do more damage than good. Do you consider that to be the case with heat acclimation as well? Or is it still like, so for Kona, for me, I've never gotten there more than a week in advance. And, I will tell my clients to get there as far out as they can. I do have one client that's going to get out there about 2 weeks early, but most of my clients are going, 5 to 7 days. We'll be there 5 to 7 days before the race. So just, I think financially is the hardest thing with that. So, so that's kind of where we're at. But yeah, I'm curious if you've ever thought of it that way, or what you would say in these circumstances.
Yeah, I would say that it's not the same as altitude in that the earlier you can get there, the better. Even if it's a couple days, and again, obviously a couple days from your race, you're not going to be doing high intensity stuff, but doing your shakeout ride or your run or whatever, any additional time that you can spend in that hot environment is going to be beneficial. While the physiological adaptations aren't going to happen, at least the mental strain, you should be better equipped to handle it mentally, knowing what you're going into, having experienced a little bit of that heat. But it's a really great question. It's not the same as altitude, where there's kind of that window that you don't want to cross into. Any amount of time extra that you can spend in a hot environment, the better.
Cool, thank you.
Good question.
Sorry, I took my video off because my cat's running around. One thing that as people are thinking about Kona, and you mentioned turning off air conditioning and things like that, it's still really important to sleep well at night. So don't don't sacrifice great sleep for acclimatization when you're in Kona. Like, maybe you don't have the aircon on during the apartment, the condo during the day, but put it on at night if that's going to make you sleep well. That's something that I've seen a few people make a mistake on in the past. So my little tip there.
Excellent point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good call.
Question is wearing like a lot of clothes while training an option as well?
So if you can mimic that hot temperature and actually get your body to sweat and get the skin at the hot, it's somewhat difficult to get your body. I mean, you don't want to wear like one of those like plastic wrestling suits. That's just dangerous. So if you could actually mimic those temperatures, I'm going to say the studies aren't there. They haven't we just don't have the research to show the benefits of that. But I would believe that if you got used to mentally training in that heat and sweating more, at least the psychological component would be better, even if you didn't have the physiological component. And I think because we've seen that the physiological adaptations really take continued exposure in the heat, it would be more difficult to actually get those adaptations. But if that was my only option, I personally would do it, to, if anything, just for the mental ability to, and for hydration purposes, you are going to be sweating more. So if you can kind of do the hydration testing and see how your body actually responds, at least you would know when your sweat rate increased, how to adjust accordingly, even if that wasn't the exact condition that you were going to be in. Good point. Good question.
All right. Any other questions on heat? If not, we can open it up to just general questions.
Hi, I've got a question. I've got the fortune or the misfortune of going to Kona. I live in Canada and it's gonna be cold here in September. So I'm looking at acclimatization. I think I can crank my my pain cave temperature up, but I remember hearing something a while ago about one of the pro athletes who used infrared lamps to put radiant heat on them while they're training. Is there any benefit to that, or is it just a dumb idea, or is it worth trying?
That's a solid point. The research isn't there yet, and depending on who you ask, a lot of people feel that it's the same as the altitude masks, in that it changes your breathing rate, but it doesn't actually help you at altitude. Like, it's kind of an overhyped
Right.
scenario. However, there are some people that say that, the muscular benefits that they feel there just isn't the research yet to support actually making a difference. If you have one, why not? What do you have to lose?
Right.
But I wouldn't go out and buy one and change your train. Like, your money could be better spent other places, doing the sauna protocol or hot tub protocol. Yeah, I don't even know how much those cost, but time-wise, getting to Kona an extra couple days. I'm not sure how.
Yeah.
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 So it's just not, I don't know. I'd still put it in the bro science category.
Right. Okay.
Sounds great.
It
but-
sounds great. Yeah. I mean, it sounds good in theory, but we all know that theory doesn't always work out.
And,
practice.
you know, a couple years from now, we might realize they may have done enough studies to show that it really does work.
Yeah.
But we just don't, it's just not there yet.
I guess it might make you feel uncomfortable and get used to the hot sun feeling on your skin or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much.
Sure.
I have a question around the efficacy of like dumping water, stuffing sponges, even though I guess we don't get sponges anymore, but like ice cubes down your sports bar and holding on to them, because I've heard one that's good, but then I've heard it's also bad because it tricks your body into thinking it's colder than it really is. So it stops like the automatic cooling system that your body does when it's overheated. So then I've heard it's best to just hold on to the ice cubes in your hand. Can you comment on if any of that is better than another?
From what I've seen in the research, any way that you can cool your body down, is beneficial. So they've even shown studies that just getting in the shade for 1 to 2 minutes actually has physiological benefits. So even something as simple as finding shade at an aid station, or if you're out on a long run or ride or whatever, can help your body to cool down. And general protocol still is use the cooling, use the ice, use the white, the white arm guards, anything you can do to keep yourself cooler in the long run is more beneficial. So still very worthwhile. Good. Lots of good questions coming out of this. I like it. Okay, anything non-heat related while we're all on here? Okay. Well, I guess to review, acclimatization, go live there at least 2 weeks. If you're a woman, 3 to 4 weeks, if you have the time. If you live in that hot environment, that's great. Probably better that you sign up for those hot races. You'll most likely do better than people coming in from out of town. Women, it's going to take a little longer. Again, improving core temperature, skin temperature, lowered rate of perceived exertion, lowered cardiovascular stress, improved ability to sweat, lower sodium in your sweat so you stay hydrated longer. Worthwhile if we can do it. I know not everybody can actually travel for several weeks. And although with remote working, you never know. It might be more common than we think.
Great. And then could you do just a quick plug for the recipe challenge? I don't think we've done a good job of like sharing what it's about.
You're right. So this month, the challenge is to share Fuelin recipes. If you don't have social media, you can email them to us. But the goal is to share get as many athletes and pictures of the meals out there. Scott and Jonathan and I want to see what you guys are making, what you like. It helps us, I mean, even on the back end, learning if you change recipes, if we can add things in, but we want to see you guys fueling. We kind of spent the beginning of the month talking about the Fuelin kitchen and how important it is. So we want to see you guys using those recipes. So save them with the Fuelin recipe challenge is the hashtag. And yeah, some people are doing an excellent job. I'm doing a poor job. I admit that. Just haven't been cooking all that much, been traveling. So anyway, you good? All right. Love to see all of your recipes. Okay. Well, thanks guys. Have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks,
Bye.
Jonathan.
Thanks a lot.